most important people in a hotel are your doormen and or door people, person, or your cleaning staff. And because they're the ones who interact with the customer the most, right? And same thing with any brand. Like, the people who work at the stores care. They show up every day. They're there solely to help sell your product as a retailer or a brand. And so, you have to kind of empower them.
We can all say, hey, if I'm opening, the first retail outpost in Japan, it's probably going to be different than Toronto, right? But to your point, like the burbs of Toronto versus downtown, probably
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
Or different socioeconomic districts within the downtown area,
Yeah.
right? And that does add a lot of. I have to imagine that adds a lot of complexity, and people might acknowledge that they're different, but they're sort of thinking like, great, but how do I plan for this, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's diminishing returns to invest a lot of hours on
Yeah.
understanding every store, right? And so, is that part of the problem that you kind of come in and tackle? Is that like
It is.
pain of not being able to understand in an efficient way what's happening?
It's two parts. You actually touched on it brilliantly. It's so part of the problem that we're trying to help and support is exactly that. Retailers do realize, and I was kind of saying a bit tongue in cheek, they do realize that no two markets are the same. They do realize that not every small store is the exact same size. The challenge is how do I manage it with the current tools that I have today? People often ask me, what's or who is your biggest competitor? And I'll say it's Microsoft Excel, right? There is usually somebody in most of the clients that we go to and work with that has created this master list, and they have like the store address, the store concept type, average square footage, number of fixtures, etc. And they figured out these variety of different methods of being able to calculate what should go into that store. Same thing with the visual merchandising teams, same thing with the product management team. So it's Excel is really powerful that way, and it's become a substantial tool, but it's very limited in other ways, because if I say, okay, well, let's take all of Canada and let's break it out to 67 unique characteristics in terms of how we're going to release products out, right? And with that, as we have inventory arrive at these stores, we need to have marketing that matches accordingly. We need to make sure that the language type is correct, but we're going to localize the pricing. So you have all these variables. And that's the kind of thing that you can't do in Excel, but you can do within our platform. So this idea of localization, we often refer to as the allocation. So how many allocations are you going to do for your back to school campaign? And interesting enough, most of our clients, before they start using our platform, are usually about maybe 5 to 10 allocations that they would have. So they have identified that this is going to go to our flagship stores. If we're talking about Canada, this might go to the stores that we have in Quebec, because it has to be in French. But, and then they have some nuance in between. Usually within a year of using our platform, all of a sudden we see them jumping up to 20 or 25. So social economic factors come into play. Demographic information comes into play too, right? So again, if we're going to target, or we have a store in an area that's predominantly South Asian, we're seeing this a bit more, or Hispanic. We're seeing this a bit more and more with clients where they're choosing to make their graphics or some of the marketing bilingual, right? Yep. So that you are able to talk to that demographic group. Also, you can look at availability of technology that people have. So, some markets, I'll use telco, for example. Some markets, Apple devices are more popular. Other markets, we see that Google devices or Samsung devices are more popular. So again, what graphic or what kind of product are we promoting in our front window? So to us, really, it's this idea of how do we support or allow you to segment your product distribution, your marketing distribution. And then the flip side of it is also how do you validate that your stores have executed your store correctly? So we have now done this elaborate kind of mapping of products that are going to go out to market. We know now it's shipped. Now we want to validate that you've put this products up, right? And so as we sit there and we make sure that the stores execute, this is a big part of our platform. So we use things like image recognition A store can literally hold up their phone, and we would use the phone's camera to cross reference what we see, what the store has done, what products they have up, and what graphics they have up against what's in our software. And if
I
there's
mean,
a
that's a little
discrepancy,
that's a little Big Brother. Like I'm imagining some poor like early 20s like local store manager being like, "Does corporate approve? Is that
yeah,
is that what's going on there?"
yeah, yeah. And people, it's interesting you say that. I mean, I've heard both ways of doing it, where some people are like, "Oh my god, that's super cool," and the other side, you're right. I mean, it's a bit of a micromanagement approach. However, what needs to happen though is, and you have to think about it, is there's a lot of planning that goes in,
Yeah,
and there's a lot. If you kind of think when things start, often I say, okay, we're going to come out with our spring and summer collection. We're going to design it, then we're going to do a runway show. We're going to have all the excitement around it, or if it's a product, we're going to do consumer testing, etc. Now we have it, we've done our packaging, everything's ready to go. We go to manufacture, now it goes to distribution, now the product hits our stores. Now we want to make sure the stores put it up. If it sits in the back warehouse and never gets, or in the back storeroom and never gets to front of house, no
yeah.
one's going to buy it, right?
Well,
So
I mean, I like I was being a little glib, Big Brother-ish. Like I'm going to ask you a second about more about the tech because to be
yeah,
perfectly honest, it is super cool, and I think it's also something that, at least in my mind, maybe I just assume things like that happen more often, right? But this does happen. So I worked for years in hardware at
okay,
Microsoft, right?
okay.
And one of the things that just made our head explode is that the shopping experience for like $1,000 Windows PC was so much worse than the shopping experience for $1,000 Mac, right? And I'm dating
Yeah,
myself because this is like
yeah,
15
yeah,
years
yeah,
ago,
yeah,
right? But and one of the things that would it all kinds of reasons, right? It was just a bad experience, and so
yeah.
we tried to work with retailers and all that. But to your point on like how do you know what's happening? A Microsoft executive walking into Best Buy to check out the shopping experience for a store, you know what? They're going to walk into a Best Buy in Redmond or Bellevue, the Seattle area where they live.
It's perfect.
And those Best Buys were great.
You're
And
perfect.
then when you went to Tulsa,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
heck, you drove an hour north, like to
yeah,
Bellingham,
yeah,
and it's chaotic, right?
yeah.
And so I guess I have lived that, and I think it's always been a little fascinating to me just how hard it is to achieve that combination of consistency of experience versus, as you were talking about earlier, relevance for the brand,
Yeah.
right? Or sorry, relevance for the market, the
It's for the
geography.
market and the brand. Yeah, yeah,
And so where I'm kind of going with this, a question for you is, you know, it sound how much of that is execution, the store, being held accountable to do it right, but also being told how to do it right. How much of
yeah.
that is capability, right? It's just hard to manage. How much of that is something else?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it's a combination of everything. I get very upset when people often refer to people who work in retail as kind of like the lowest denominator, or they don't really understand it, or etc. I mean, Isidore Sharp, who's the founder of the Four Seasons hotels, hotel chain, mentioned that people who work at the stores care. They show up every day. They're there solely to help sell your product as a retailer or a brand.
Yeah.
And so, you have to kind of empower them. And so, what we see a lot of time is, yes, there is a bit of accountability that comes through the platform in terms of this is exactly what we would like you to do, or at least some guidance. But visual merchandising has always been around. Like, it's not that it's new. What we're doing a little bit now is, we're, instead of having a dedicated person that does the visual merchandising, now that some of that responsibility can be managed by the staff. So we give a tool that gives them clear instructions. And then again, what often used to happen is stores or companies will have secret shoppers, so people that they would send out to stores to kind of spy on stores, and kind of audit the stores. And we're moving away from that to say, hey, do what you've done, take a picture. The nice thing about using AI and image recognition is we can give a response back to the store instantly. So it's
Yeah.
almost an interaction that happens between the store associate and the device. Versus often what a lot of companies do that don't use AI is they'll take a picture and then it's sent back. Somebody at headquarters will review that picture, email the store and say it's wrong. So it takes a bit of time.